Hello, welcome to another grammar video. Based on the results of the poll that I posted on the YouTube community, you picked the topic of JAK and JAKO. So today we are going to talk about this one word, or is it two words, or is there a difference? You're going to find out in today's video, which is gonna be quite fun. Jdeme na to! Ahoj, vítejte na mém kanále Czech by Zuzka, kde vám pomocí angličtiny vysvětluju českou gramatiku. The word JAKO or JAK is one of those words that have multiple meanings. The interesting thing is that sometimes JAKO can be shortened to JAK, and in certain contexts, JAK is the only option, not JAKO. So I want to talk about when to use JAKO, when to use JAK, and when it's okay to use both. Let's go through a number of examples so you get a good idea of how this word works. Before we start, I'm going to give lots of examples because you need to see this in different contexts. If you're a beginner, you can take a pen and a paper and pause the video every time you find an interesting sentence that you think you could use. That would be okay for you to learn and use in a certain context. That means don't copy all the sentences, because by the time we finish, you could say, well, I'm never going to memorize all these sentences. Once again, if you're a beginner, watch this video, pick 5 sentences or 6 sentences at most, and tell yourself, I'm going to learn these sentences by heart, and maybe some other time you will rewatch this video and you can add more examples. And even if you're not a beginner, you can still take notes. The words JAK or JAKO can be translated as how, like, as if, or even such as. It all depends on the context. I also want to mention that I will not include the phrase jakoby or jakoby, these two expressions that sound exactly the same, but one is written as 2 words. I would like to dedicate the next video to these 2 expressions. Today we're only focusing on JAK or JAKO, which will be plenty, believe me. First, I will talk about JAK and only JAK. I will give you examples where we cannot replace it by JAKO. JAK as the only option can be translated as how, or the way, or even what something is like. JAK is used with a verb phrase. There is a verb after it. Because we describe how something is done, we talk about the manner, how something is done. So, when we have questions such as how are you, we will use JAK. Jak se máš? You know this phrase. Jak se máš? How are you? We cannot say jako se máš. That doesn't work. Or jak se jmenuješ? Jak se jmenuješ? What's your name? So, notice here we cannot translate it as how, but if you know what jmenovat se means, it will make sense, because jmenovat se means to name yourself. So, jak se jmenuješ literally means how do you name yourself? So, it makes total sense, right? Another question, jak si to udělal? How did you do it? Jak si to udělal? It doesn't have to be only questions, it can be also exclamations. In Czech, this is less and less common, but there are still certain expressions that we use. For example, jak typické? How typical of you, for example. Jak typické. And there is no verb, but we can imagine there was a verb. Jak je to typické? How typical this is. So remember, these questions can only work with jak. Jak se máš? Jak se jmenuješ? Jak si to udělal? Jak typické. Not jako. Jak also works as a connector. When we connect 2 clauses, there are typical verbs that go with it. Oftentimes it's verbs connected to thinking or observing. For example, you can say, viděli jsme je, jak utíkají. We saw them running. In Czech, literally, this means we saw them how they were running. Viděli jsme je, jak utíkají. Or you can say, líbí se mi, jak mluví. I like the way he or she talks. Líbí se mi, jak mluví. I like the way he or she talks, but we could also say, I like how he or she talks. Líbí se mi, jak mluví. Přemýšlím, jak to udělat. I'm thinking about how to do it. Přemýšlím, jak to udělat. Here we could think it's like an indirect question. You're thinking, Jak to udělat? How to do it? And then you use that as an indirect question. Přemýšlím, jak to udělat. Vím, jak to udělat. I know how to do it. Vím, jak to udělat. Notice you can have an infinitive, you can also have a verb in a specific form. Depends what you want to say. I'm thinking how to do it. This is the same structure in English as well. How to do it, jak to udělat. Versus vím, jak to funguje. I know how that works. Vím, jak to funguje. Udělal jsem to tak, jak jsi mi řekla. I did it the way you told me. Udělal jsem to tak, jak jsi mi řekla. Or this expression that's very common, and you probably know it. Jak chceš. As you want. Jak chceš. As you want. As you like. The complete phrase could be udělej to, jak chceš. Do it as you like. But we usually just use jak chceš. As you want. A very common use in informal Czech of the word jak is when you want to say as soon as. As soon as it can be translated in several ways, but in proper Czech would be jakmile, as soon as, which is something that we don't say as much. We would write it, but we don't say it as much, and we often shorten it to jak, and it often appears together with the word hned jak. I actually gave an example of this sentence last week. Zavolám ti hned, jak přijdu do práce. I'll call you as soon as I get to work. Zavolám ti hned jak. So you see this pair. Hned jak. As soon as. This is the informal Czech that everybody uses. And the more proper Czech would be zavolám ti jakmile přijdu do práce. Here's another example of jak with this meaning. Hned jak to budeš mít hotové, tak mi řekni. As soon as you get it done, tell me. Hned jak to budeš mít hotové, tak mi řekni. We can leave out hned as well. We can just say, jak to budeš mít hotové, tak mi řekni. Also notice the pattern. We like to use jak tak. Like as soon as you do something, then let me know, for example. Jak tak. Now let's take a look at jako. Jako and only jako. Jako can be translated as. When we talk about a function, how we can use something. So remember, jak in these sentences that I'm going to give you is not possible. Only jako. In proper English, I believe that these sentences that I will mention could be translated or should be translated only with as. But the grammar also allows like as well. In certain phrases, people also say like, but there is a difference because we talk about something as a function. So for example, I could say, pracuju jako učitelka. I work as a teacher. I am a teacher and I work as a teacher. Being a teacher is my function. Pracuju jako učitelka. I cannot say pracuju jak učitelka. Or imagine you don't have a knife, so you use something else instead. And then you can say, použiju to jako nůž. I'll use this as a knife, like a knife. This tool, this object will work as a knife. Použiju to jako nůž. Or something happens and then you say, beru to jako dobré znamení. I take that as a good sign. Beru to jako dobré znamení. This, whatever happened, has a function of a good sign for me. Beru to jako dobré znamení. Notice that we have jako and a noun phrase. There is no verb after jako. We say as something. We can also have an adjective with it or an adverbial phrase. So we have these certain expressions that are typical. For example, jako dítě, as a child. If you want to say that as a child you used to do something and you were actually a child, you would say jako dítě jsem hrál fotbal. As a child, I played football. Or you could also say jako malý, jako malá. As a small kid. It also appears in these expressions. Jako obvykle. As usual. Jdeš pozdě, jako obvykle. You're late, as usual. Jako vždycky. As always. Jako vždycky. And also these expressions. Jako první, as the first one. Jako druhý, as the second one. Jako poslední, as the last one. So remember, jako is translated usually as. And we talk about a function. These examples that I gave you will only work with JAKO. If you replace everything with jak, it would either sound strange, or if you said, for example, jak dítě, it would be the informal way of saying like a child. You act like a child. You're not a child. It would be comparison. Your behavior compares to a child's behavior. So remember that there is a difference between jak and JAKO. And maybe this is getting more complicated. Give it time, let it sink in. Memorize a couple of phrases and don't think about it. Not for now. We're still with JAKO and only JAKO. JAKO also works as such as, when you give examples. It can be paired with jako například, as for example, or we can just say jako and then name the things, and it would work as such as. For example, someone talks about the bookstore and what's inside each section. So in this international section they would say, máme tu zahraniční autory, jako jsou Stephen King, Nesbo, nebo Terry Pratchett. And this means we have foreign authors such as. So you can say jako jsou, or you can leave out so. You can just say jako Stephen King. Or you could say jako například Stephen King. Jako also works as a filler word, which is important because sometimes you will find it in a sentence, you will hear it, and there will be no way to translate it. Many times it works like this in English as well. When jako works as a filler word in Czech, it can also be translated with another filler word, like in English, most of the time. So two friends are talking and one says, a on jako přišel a řekl jako že. And he like came and he said that, blah, blah, blah. A on jako přišel. Jako doesn't have any meaning, it's only a filler word. A on jako přišel a říkal. And then you can hear it in a sentence like this. A co mám jako podle tebe dělat? Something like, and like, what do you think I should do? A co mám jako podle tebe dělat? Or this question. A co má jako bejt? Something like an impolite way of asking. And what's the problem? What's your deal? You got a problem? Co má jako bejt? Bejt as in beat. A co má jako bejt? We can even shorten it and ask, a co jako? A co jako? I also thought of this expression, jak jako, or jako jak, that you can hear. For example, instead of saying, jak to mám udělat, you can say, jak to mám jako udělat. Jak, as in how, jako as the filler word. And then you can shorten it to jak jako, or jako jak, jako jak. Now, careful. We are going to talk about jako, which can be shortened to jak. What's the difference? The only difference is that it should be jako in proper Czech, and it's often shortened to jak in colloquial informal Czech. We can do this when we have a comparison, some kind of analogy. This is often translated as like in English, or as if. So for example, you compare, something is like something else, or someone reminds you of someone else. Vašek je přesně jako táta. Vašek is just like dad. And you can say, Vašek je přesně jak táta, and that would be more informal. Vašek je přesně jak táta. Or you buy a cake, and it's really good, and you can say, oh, it's just like mom's. So in Czech you would say, jako od maminky. Jako od maminky. Or jak od maminky. More informal. Běžel jsem jako o život. I ran for my life. Here it's a little bit interesting, because in Czech it literally means I ran like for my life. In English you don't say that like. The full expression would be jako by mi šlo o život. Jít o život is something concerns life, like it's life threatening. And then we usually just use jako o život. Jako by mi šlo o život, as if my life was in danger. Or this example that you might have seen on the YouTube community. Cítím se jako ve filmu. I feel like I'm in a movie. Cítím se jako ve filmu. And again, you can say cítím se jak ve filmu. Vypadá jako hodný člověk. He or she seems like a nice person. Vypadá jako hodný člověk. Or vypadá jak hodný člověk. Chutná to jako ryba. It tastes like fish. Chutná to jak ryba as well. Here you can use jako or jak. Jak being informal. Remember, and we compare something. Something reminds us of something else. So here is where you can use chováš se jako dítě or chováš se jak dítě. You act like a child. And now we're at the end. In this last chapter, I would like to talk about comparisons that are part of some idiomatic expressions. Let's start with a few standard expressions, standard phrases that we use for a comparison as a simile. Eva je mazaná jako liška. Eva is sly as a fox. Mazaná jako liška. Or mazaná jak liška, informal, because we're still making an analogy. Mazaná jako liška, sly as a fox. Tvrdý jako kámen, hard as a rock, or tvrdý jako kámen. Au. Ten chleba je tvrdý jak kámen. The bread is hard as a rock. Tvrdý jak kámen, or tvrdý, the colloquial Czech, tvrdý jak kámen, or jako kámen. And now I have 3 more expressions that we can use in Czech. There are of course many more, but I just pick these ones that I think they are funny to learn. And I might need your help translating them to English so they sound as funny as in Czech. Let's do it this way. I will first tell you the sentence in Czech. Then I will tell you the literal translation. And I want you to think about what it means actually. So the first one is Vašek se tváří jak vyvoraná myš. Vašek se tváří jak vyvoraná myš. Or jako vyoraná myš. That would be more proper. This literally means Vašek looks like a plowed out mouse. You can say this about a person who's looking a bit startled. It's looking a bit silly. They don't know what's going on. Maybe they just received some news and they are kind of in shock. They're just not looking very good. Basically, person is looking surprised in a kind of silly way. In English, you can say something like that someone is staring like the deer in the headlights, or looks like a deer in the headlights as well. In Czech, you can use this expression tváří se, which means they put on the face literally. Their expression is as a mouse whose home has been plowed out. Or also kouká, he or she is looking. Let me know if you have a better translation in English for this expression. Our next expression is really fun. Čumí jak péro z gauče. Or čumí jako péro z gauče. This translates to literally, someone is staring like a spring coming out of a couch. Staring like a spring from a couch. So what do you think that person looks like? Probably also confused, out of place, surprised, kind of like that mouse as well. But this expression is colloquial because there is the verb čumět, which is very, very informal way of saying to look around, to have an expression, kind of like a dumb expression. So when someone is surprised and looking kind of dumb, you can say that they look like a spring that just came out of an old sofa. Čumí jak péro z gauče. Or you can say, co čumíš jak péro z gauče? What are you looking at, dummy? And our last expression is also really fun. Směje se jako měsíček na hnoji. Or jak měsíček na hnoji. Here I am pretty sure měsíček refers to an herb, a marigold, měsíček. Měsíček also means a moon, like little moon, but what I think this expression really means literally, that someone is smiling as a marigold on a pile of manure. So if you imagine a pile of ugly manure with a cute little marigold, it kind of looks silly too, right? We would use this with a person who's smiling in a dumb way too, or grinning and it looks really silly. I found an expression grinning like a Cheshire cat. And I think this could work. It just doesn't sound as funny as someone's grinning like a marigold on a pile of manure. Směje se jako měsíček na hnoji. You can have different variations. You can have směje se or usmívá se, smiling, or směje se is more like laughing. Some people even use culit se. Culit se is a local variation of smiling. Culit se is to smile. culí se jako měsíček na hnoji. These last couple of expressions that I showed you are called přirovnání in Czech, like a simile. Phrases that we often use to describe a situation or a person. And they usually have the word JAKO or JAK in them. I actually found this really nice website, přirovnej.cz. You can take a look at it. And remember, when you compare something to something else, then you can use both JAK and JAKO. Okay, that's it. I think this was quite a lot. Let me know what was your favorite expression, or if you came across another expression that was really nice and contained JAKO, or sentence with JAK and JAKO that startled you, and we can talk about it in the comments. Looking forward to it. To je ode mě všechno. Next week we are going to take a look at jakoby and jakoby and it will be another fun video. Thanks for watching and for supporting my channel with all the likes and comments and shares. I really appreciate it. Mějte se krásně a za týden ahoj!